Okay. Well, it is 12:30 on Friday, April the 10th, 2026, and today launches a wonderful AI session. Thank you so much for attending. The AI theme today that we're going to talk about is ethics and many aspects of ethics in regards to AI. Let me introduce myself. I'm Jeff Schomburg. I'm the Executive Director of Academic Technology at St. Mary's University, and have been here for 2 dozen years to see a lot of evolution, but never any so fast as the two-digit acronym of AI across higher education and our world. So this is the second in a series we're calling the AI Confluence, and that's really a multi-campus conversation between Our Lady of the Lake, St. Mary's University, and the University of the Incarnate Word. Today's topic is surrounding the theme of ethics. We have three wonderful and highly skilled and experienced professors with us to talk about ethics and AI from their different perspectives. And so, as a moderator, I'm just going to pose some questions to our panelists. Let me introduce them just real quickly by name, and then what I'm going to let them do is introduce themselves super quick. So we have Professor Dustin Hardwick. Dustin, raise your hand. Let everybody know your camera is working perfectly. We have Professor Vanessa Garza Clark. Vanessa. And we have Professor Mason Clark at St. Mary's. So let me real quickly hand over the microphone. If you want to introduce yourself and kind of some of your area and experience of expertise, Dustin, why don't we start with you? Tell us about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Jeff. I'm Dustin Hardwick. I'm an associate professor at UIW School of Rehabilitation Sciences. I teach biomechanics for kind of my things that I do here at UIW. My research interests include ethics in healthcare through the lens of physical therapy. My recent publications, several of them are out right now, are on that intersection of AI and ethics. I'm also one of the AI fellows as part of a program we have here at UIW. And why I'm here, besides that, I've just always been a tech nerd. That's kind of like my second profession is more of a hobby. So I'm really happy to be able to take that hobby and make it something that's useful to our sister universities, my own university. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Tech nerd makes us smile around here, not roll our eyes. It's a good thing. Professor Clark, tell us about yourself. Vanessa, that is. Tell us about yourself and your experience and your time at Our Lady.
Yes, so my name is Vanessa Clark, and I am Associate Dean of Graduate Affairs at Our Lady of the Lake University. I'm also Professor of Computer Information Systems and Security. I have been here for 12 years, and in that time, I've also been the chair of the CISS department. And the topic of ethics, when reached out about this, I said, ethics is something that I have to teach all the time, right? In my courses and in our field, it's something that is extremely important. And so I thought it would be really interesting to join. So thank you so much for having me.
Welcome. Your perspectives are going to be fantastic. And lastly, Professor Mason Clark from our St. Mary's School of Law. Certainly some legal aspects and legal experience to ethics and AI. But tell us about yourself, Mason.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm Mason Clark. I'm an assistant professor of law at St. Mary's. I just got here in August, so I'm still fairly new, but we love San Antonio so far. I am actually have a background in privacy and cybersecurity. I was a data privacy attorney, a litigator for a few years before I went in-house and served as a privacy officer. And it was towards the tail end of that I really started working with, I think every privacy attorney at this point has kind of shifted practice to include some questions about AI. And now, as an academic, I'm writing on things like legal ethics and AI and its use and deployment. Some recent papers are, I wrote one arguing that public defenders have an ethical duty to use AI ethically. And then I've written a paper on, it's called Digital Dram Shops and Intoxicating Algorithms. And it's about the idea that platforms are incentivized to keep people on the platform and they're using AI to do so. And that they are, quote unquote, intoxicating their customers and they owe them a duty of care. So it's great to be here. I'm so excited to present with everyone and we look forward to it.
Very good. Well, thank you, everybody, and again, all of our attendees. This is the quality of your professors at all three institutions. We are lucky to have all of you in higher education, and our city for sure. So let's continue the confluence of questions. A little bit of housekeeping. We will keep this to a primary kind of 45 minutes max discussion. We will try to leave openness for Q&A pod time where you get to drop in a few extra questions from this being a virtual only meeting, and we will answer those. So keep what comes to mind, and we'll try to get through as many of those as possible. But our professors and our panelists may already answer them during their time. So let's start with Professor Hardwick. Professor Hardwick, and then this is kind of a question that may be answered by everybody in the same way. For each of you, what important topic questions around AI ethics do you believe that not enough people are talking about? What are people not talking enough about in regards to AI and ethics?
Thank you, Jeff. The thing that's kind of living rent-free in my head is the moral distance that's being caused by AI, like the distance between our actions and the accountability for those actions. This is not like a new topic. It's kind of been talked about since war went from axes and swords to guns. It's a lot harder to go up in somebody's face and stab them versus shoot them from a distance. And as kind of war went forward, dropping bombs, drones, missiles, those are all things that create moral distance, or a distance between the decision to do something and the outcome of that decision. So we've already added quite a bit of moral distance just in kind of modern society in the way, and I use war as one example of that, but that can be applied to a lot of things. In healthcare, it's algorithmic decisions about where hospitals are placed in the geographic location of a city or rural areas, the staffing available for different types of patients. All these things are already distant between the decision and the outcome and the person making those decisions. I feel like AI is going to take that a monumental step forward, because now the human doesn't even have to make the decision to drop the bomb, to tell somebody that their care is not compatible with the bottom line of our healthcare system. And obviously there are a lot of other correlates in other kind of enterprise in different areas, but I think the more we use AI to make decisions, and the more it's embedded in the decision making at all stratification layers of any organization, it's going to be very easy for unethical decisions to be made and nobody to feel accountable for it, to take accountability for it, or at the very least, it's going to be very ubiquitous, like that the shared ownership for that will keep it away from any one person. So it could be very easy to fire 10,000 employees and the CEO or HR doesn't really have to take accountability for ruining those 10,000 lives. They can just say it was AI that made the decision, sent the email, their hands are clean. So I really worry about offloading all of our important decisions to AI and how that moral distance will incentivize less ethical applications.
I think that moral distance is a very valid term to keep in mind. Absolutely. Vanessa, same question. What do you think people aren't asking enough about?
I think an overlooked issue is ethical literacy. We spend a lot of time talking about what's good, what's bad, right? AI good, AI bad, and not enough time making sure people actually understand what it is doing, right? What are we doing? What are we actually doing with AI? What are its limitations, right? It does have limitations. What are the limitations? Where are the outputs of AI coming from? What risks are we accepting, right? Or are people accepting when they use AI? I think ethical literacy is extremely important. And a lot of the time, what I see, particularly in students, is that the ethical problem is not necessarily always malicious use, right? I used it and I wasn't supposed to use it in this way, but I didn't know it. A lot of the times it's more uninformed use than malicious. And so I think it's going to be very important for us to spend a lot of time just informing and not just saying teaching. Yes, I think it's important to teach students how to use AI, but I think it's extremely important to first make sure they understand AI, the ethical issues around AI before then we go in and say, okay, this is how you use it.
Great answer. Mason, how about you? What in your world or what do you think is not being asked enough?
Yeah, well, this is. I'll start by saying this is I think my fourth panel this semester asking about AI and ethics. And in the legal world, one, I think everybody is talking about AI and ethics kind of across the board. And in the legal world, there's a lot of repeated material on like when should lawyers use it, when should lawyers not use it, how should they use it, should it be used in criminal courts differently than it is in maybe like a civil court, right? But one thing that I don't have a good answer for, and I don't hear it talked about enough, is what are we going to do? What are our legal and ethical obligations for, and I don't want to use this word flippantly, but kind of the conscientious objectors? What are our legal and ethical obligations for those who, for moral, religious, in any other reasons, don't want to abandon their human autonomy? Right. And that can be within a legal framework. Dustin mentioned laying people off. Like, are we going to see the kinds of challenges both in the courtroom and in kind of like the court of public opinion? Are we going to see the kinds of legal frameworks that appeared around things like vaccination status, religious practice at work, moral objections, right? And I don't know how that is going to come out yet, right? And it seems like we're kind of steamrolling that issue right now because everyone's saying if you don't use it, you will be left behind. And I just was on a panel on Wednesday with a senior executive at a Fortune 50 that openly said, "I will be using AI adoption," meaning who has adopted this particular tool or this particular program, and how often are they using it as a key metric on whether or not you've met satisfactory job performance, right? Well, what are the legal and ethical issues around the people who absolutely refuse to do it, right? And what is our legal and ethical obligation to advise them why that may or may not be a good choice? And I just don't hear that enough. And I think that's probably going to be the subject of a paper here soon.
Might even be the subject of a case. Yes, Dustin.
I just wanted to follow up a little bit on that because I've heard some people talking about, like in the tech world, instead of your job performance being measured on performance outcomes or project outcomes, which that's still going to be a part of it, but token utilization is becoming a metric. So there's companies that flippantly said if they're not using all of their tokens every day, week, month, however they allocate their API keys, then those employees are going to be looked at with more scrutiny. I don't know how ubiquitous or like how common that is, but I think it's something that it's being talked about enough that our students and those of us that we interact with should at least be aware of that there will be new standards of productivity, whether that's morally, ethically correct. That's part of this whole discussion, but it is out there. And they're also devising ways to track your token use, like within the like Amazon Web Service platform. They're allowed to see how you use your tokens. So I think we'll see performance metrics based on token utilization, not in quantity and quality. And where does that leave the person like you're talking about that has a moral objection to using it or wants to do it the old-fashioned way? Is there a place for them in that company or what does that look like? So
very good. That may lead into, or that's led into my next question. And this is kind of maybe another round for each of you, because you represent three different sort of professions. Audience, our a physical therapy and a healthcare perspective, our business and information management system perspective and business, Vanessa and Mason, the legal profession. So real quickly, and we'll start with Vanessa with you and make our way around again. Where do you see the profession itself that we're educating our students of tomorrow to be in? Where do you see the profession using AI, and why? What does that mean to us? How are we adjusting or such? Where do you see it going in your area?
Well, we're already seeing right now a lot of changes, particularly in software development.
Mhm.
So, right now we're all talking about AI assisted programming, and it's very much in use, so much so that we got together and discussed, okay, we need to teach this to students. And so it's it's not it, we're not at a place where an entire program is going to be created uh, via AI. That is not where we're at. You develop code. It is not code that you can just drag and drop into something you're
Mhm.
developing. You still have to have the knowledge, right? So the human interaction is still very much needed. However, we are seeing a lot of efficiency, right? If you had a group before of 30 people developing something, we can increase the efficiency to where we can cut that team in half. So we're definitely seeing an effect in developing. And so I think kind of shifting and saying, okay, students need to be prepared and know how to use this for development, but it's going to affect the workforce. It already is. Just because of those efficiencies we're seeing. Cybersecurity, definitely, we're seeing it. There's a lot of software that can, pen testing software, and that is now a lot smarter than what we had before, right? Where it was just detection. Now we have, triage of the issue, right? So we're seeing that in cybersecurity quite a bit. Again, in our field, we're not seeing complete replacement of these bigger professions. The human element is still very important. We're not at a place where AI can just independently catch something and fix it on its own. But we're definitely seeing a lot of impact in the workforce because of efficiencies that AI has been creating.
Gotcha. Mason, how about you in the legal world, where we're heading our students to practice? What will they be facing in terms of AI use and ethics?
Yeah, for sure. And very quickly, I want to touch on a point that Vanessa made about cybersecurity. I teach a couple of privacy law classes, and I do a lot of cyber just because that was when I was a practitioner, I did a lot of breach litigation. And I used Claude to simulate a phishing email, and and I said specifically I want to use this to instruct the students, right? Because if not, Claude would probably tell me no. But I I used it to simulate an attack against my former institution while I was there, and it did it for me in 14 seconds. So we're seeing, like, especially in the context of phishing, right? Some of the telltale signs of a phishing attack used to be, misspellings or maybe some mispronunciations, maybe some key like written indicators that, maybe this isn't a human on the other end of this, right? Well, AI is making that almost a non-issue anymore. So there's that cheery thought. From the legal profession, I think one, like the education of future lawyers right now, I think a lot of people have always seen law school as, and the practice of law as, like this very human thought heavy profession, right? It's very much, especially for those who are in the courtroom, right? You have to think on your feet. You have to be able to extemporaneously speak and respond to objections and have a fervent defense or prosecution, right? And you have to have a courtroom style and appearance, right? And so I think the law, which is almost always slower to respond to technology than any other industry, but we've been particularly resistant to AI because everybody keeps falling back on, well, there still has to be a human at the end of it. And that may be true for things like, complex litigation. But document review at big law firms is not going to be done by first year associates anymore. And so, how do we teach students how do we prepare students for these jobs at these firms that are not going to exist and really are already being downsized? You know, I think of the AmLaw 50, I think over half of them have publicly announced that they're laying off or reducing first-year workforce and junior associate workforce. So, you know, I think from an education standpoint and the education of future lawyers, we have to get past the paradigm of lawyers are different. We are exceptional because it's such a human thought-intensive practice. Well, yeah, it is in some areas of the law, but in others, it's very repetitive. It can be easily automated. It can be outsourced, right? That human element can be outsourced. So there's that. And in practice, you know, actual practitioners, you know, one of the things that we just had a panel at the law school, and we had Judge Xavier Rodriguez, who's on the Western District of Texas, the U.S. District Court. It's a federal court in Texas. And he was saying, you know, we have no response right now. We have no response to deep fakes being introduced as evidence, right? We don't have updated rules of procedure, rules of evidence to try and combat, you know, the malicious use of AI. We have resource disparities between especially in the criminal law world, between prosecutors, right? So the government has lots of money that they can help prosecutor offices across the country invest in U.S. Attorney's Office, invest in the kind of infrastructure that makes AI safe and productive, right? Public defender offices do not have those same resources, right? We already have an in-access to justice problem, but the failure to use it by a public defender could be malpractice under the model rules of conduct, right? And so how do you address that? So there's a lot of issues, and it's changing the law in a lot of ways. And unfortunately, for the first time ever, you know, a lawyer doesn't have an answer, right? Even if it's not a good one, right? We don't really know what to do yet.
I'm gonna write that down. I think we don't have all the answers. I think hearing you say that is very important to the profession. Dustin, we talked about a little bit to kind of finish this second question up, but some of our earlier discussions have been how much of a chain effect there can be from ethics in the healthcare world, where something happens early with AI, and yet the end of the healthcare activity is farther down. But you've got an interesting depth of the aspect of healthcare ethics and AI in terms of what we're going to wind up seeing already happening. Tell us from your healthcare perspective, what is on your mind here?
So as far as the workforce, I think the patient-facing clinicians, and PT is one of them, for now, we are shielded because we provide the hands-on care. Our license is what is needed to provide that care. So for now, the job market for patient-facing clinicians is still pretty steady. There may be some clinicians that are off the patient-facing that might have more disruption. So in the radiology world, maybe there becomes less need for as many clinicians as they use AI. But for our patient-facing, they are going to still be there, but they're going to be in an entirely different world than they have been. So one thing is the workforce around them is going to change. So healthcare companies are going to use this opportunity to reduce the number of support staff for those clinicians, you know, with the idea that AI will make up all of the efficiencies that all of those humans produced before. I think that's going to put extra burden on our clinicians, because I don't think that they will get that right. I think they will use it as an excuse to cut the negative side off the balance sheet and then figure out from the back end what didn't work. So I think there's going to be a lot of disruption in the support for our clinicians in the future, and before we figure out how to best manage the AI triage and assistance and all that. So the world they're coming into is a lot different. So a lot of our work used to be documentation. Now that can be handled by an ambient. And for those of you that may not be familiar with that, ambient documentation just means that as the clinician is talking to you in your interview with them, your point of care with your clinician, AI is listening, it's pulling out the relevant information to create a note so that the clinician can have that to refer back on and send to their colleagues in other parts of the healthcare field. that alone changes the workflow for the clinician, but it also introduces some other things that we'll probably get to later, like privacy and those. So I'll kind of save those a little bit. So it's a different world as far as what they'll be doing from the day to day. I believe that it will probably then require the clinicians to see more patients. They used to have some documentation time, so that'll be a change there. The other thing that is going to change is AI is going to be making decisions, and I kind of alluded to this a little bit on the moral distance. AI is going to be part of every decision from the top down. And so that AI is distributing those decisions across many different layers. But at the end of the day, the person that's accountable for that patient is the clinician with that patient. So I worry about the moral agency being eroded, or moral agency just being the ability to make decisions and be responsible for their consequences. If AI is part of that decision making, but I'm holding all of the consequences, then we have distributed input but concentrated consequences. So this is something I talked about to my students about every chance I get, is make sure that you know how AI is being used at every step before that patient gets to you. And then when they're there with you, you are making sure that you approve of all of the things that AI is doing, from the note, like making sure that ambient listening device produces a note that's agreeable to you. I think that, and this goes a little bit back to what Vanessa was talking about, I don't think the ethical challenges in a clinician is going to be purposeful. Like they're going to take a shortcut on purpose. But it's very easy after seeing 20, 30 patients to just sign the note without looking at it, or just accept the prognosis or accept the number of visits that are being chosen for you. So these are the things, this kind of distributed decisions, but that consequence is still me, is the thing that I would be most worried about as a clinician out there. Is at the end of the day, it's my license on the line, but how much of those decisions were me? And I think that's a problem that we need to be ahead of, which we're not, and start to think about how do we distribute both the decisions and consequences, or make, I don't know the right answer. There's so many things that go into that, and there's so many different players at play. But those are the things that I think it makes it a different world.
Thank you so much. Vanessa, I've got a question that's going to be from my alternate list, and yet I think it's perfect right here for you. Knowing, again, you almost made me think of a commercial that I keep seeing on YouTube about, somebody just made an app with an AI solution, but what ethical risks are still underappreciated? Maybe it's, students in the classroom, and maybe it's creating the programs of the future, but what comes to mind when the question is, what ethical issues to you, or excuse me, what ethical risks are still possibly underappreciated?
I think largely unappreciated. That's a good question. I think one of the things that's one of the risks that's unappreciated is, and actually I have this as part of another one of my responses that I had prepared, but I think wellness, and this I just thought about this, Dustin, when you were talking about productivity being mentioned, measured via token, right, usage.
Mm-hmm.
I think wellness is something that is underappreciated throughout in all of the fields. And what I mean by that is, think back to when you used to receive a communication and then you had some time to sit down and think and perhaps review and research and then respond. And then we moved to email, right? And then that became, I wrote you 2 hours ago. Why haven't I heard back from you? I think one of the risks that AI is going to bring in all of our fields is that expectation of extreme speed and efficiency. And I think that's an ethical risk, because if you don't give me enough time to sit down and do that research and double check, like Dustin was saying, go back and check a chart and go back to and see what was done using AI, or whether what AI told me is in fact accurate. If I don't have that time, what kinds of decisions am I going to be making? What kinds of responses am I going to be giving, whether it be in business or to my students in a class or to the university as an associate dean? I think that's an ethical risk. We're not allowing people to fact check, to really think, research their responses. We're moving even more. We were already there. I think this moves us a little further down the I want you to respond right now. Right? And now you have all these tools, right? You can be so efficient and so fast. You have all these tools, use AI, provide a quick response. But I think we're eliminating a very important part of the process, and that is really thinking through what we're doing, what policies we're setting, what responses we're providing, what actions we're taking. I think that's a huge risk.
I love the answer. Okay. Jump in, anyone, if you've got some things to add on to this question. But Mason, who are the ethical gatekeepers and decision makers around AI that come to mind?
Yeah, so in law, and I think in other disciplines too, but particularly in law, scholars and practitioners and researchers all tend to fit into kind of three buckets, right? There's the courts, there's the legislature, there's regulation, or there's the market. So either courts are going to help enforce new laws, or they're going to make precedent, right? Legislatures like Congress or state legislatures are going to pass bills, pass laws that help regulate this. There's going to be federal regulators that go after AI, and then there's the market approach. Kind of the laissez-faire. Let's let capitalism play out, and whoever comes up with the best solution is going to be the winner in the end, right? And I don't really know where I fall in those. I tend to be more of a legislation person. I tend to write, in favor of strong legislation, mostly because my background in privacy, right? It's where we've seen really impactful changes in privacy, particularly in areas like the EU, right? They passed this first of its kind omnibus privacy law that applies across the globe to anyone who's collecting data about people living in the EU, the European Union, right? And it was successful. It's definitely changed business practices, even for American companies, particularly for our big tech giants like Google, like Meta, right, like Apple. I tend to be a legislation person, but there's holes in all of these. I guess it's the problem. And if you think courts are better positioned because they're more reactive, they can take things on a case-by-case basis, right? They can say, this is the rule for this case, or here's a general rule for cases like this moving forward. But courts are also, historically speaking, dominated by older white men who might not necessarily, one, understand the technology, or two, care about the technological changes, right? And don't necessarily appreciate the tension between AI and the law. There's regulators, but we've seen how federal agencies can be co-opted by different commanders in chief, right? Who have different policy agendas. Maybe we don't want to pass any state regulations on AI because we want our economy to boom and we want to be the hub of AI innovation. So we cancel all these regulations, or at least we suspend them temporarily. And I think the market solution, is perhaps the most dangerous in this area, right? And in that article I wrote about intoxicating algorithms, I tried to make this point clear. There are times when market solutions, yes, there will be a resolution at some point. There will be a market winner. But in things like AI, there's always very clear losers too. And I think the downside here is particularly troubling. And I think you can look at what just happened with Anthropic. Dustin and I just talked about this the other day, but you had 3 of the 4 leading AI development companies pretty quickly fold under pressure from the US government to assist in military operations. right? And you had a holdout. You had Anthropic, and they took the position, we are going to be the differentiator in the market. People are going to use our product more because we have ethics and we stand behind them, and we are not going to back down. Well, that didn't last very long, right? Not much later, the U.S. government sued them and classified them as a risk to the supply chain. The first time in our history as a country that a company's been labeled a high risk in the supply chain, a domestic company. And now, what's going to happen? There's a lawsuit to be had, right? That I think Anthropic will eventually win. But the market solution where the market player was trying to do something good, right, immediately falls prey to regulatory capture, lobbying, politics generally, and immense pressure from the other three to cave as well, right? And so that, who are the gatekeepers? It's all of them. Like, all of them have to have a role. There has to be a legislature that passes laws, a court that interprets those laws, regulators that help businesses understand the laws and implement, new design codes and products liability barriers and things like that. And we need a market that's willing to stand up for ethics, right? And I don't know, maybe we'll hold out for the rest of our lives for that to happen. But I think all of them play a role in kind of regulating this space.
Vanessa, jump in.
I just want to jump in real quick and follow that because of everything that you said. I want to circle back to that, to literacy. It's really scary when you have policymakers, politicians, whoever is doing this, and has really no understanding of what AI is, what it does, how it works, where the information comes from. So I think that's particularly, like you said, you have politicians, judges, where they don't know what it is or how it works, but they're still putting out, legislation for it. And so I think that's particularly scary.
True. Very true. Yes, jump on that too, Dustin.
So I agree with everything that's being said, and I don't trust the market too much to do this, but I will say there was a little bit of hope here. After the decision of the government on Anthropic's app went from number 30 to number 1 on the App Store in a period of hours, which shows that there are people following this and they are showing their support for the more ethical company in the open free market. And I think to another degree, if you look at the large businesses that are choosing their AI, Anthropic is winning that war so far. Like, do I think it's all because of ethics? Absolutely not. I think that the efficiency of co-work, and that is probably a big driver. But I think there is a piece of that to know that they can trust this company and their shareholder value to this company. So there's a little bit of a bright spot, I think, in the market kind of policing thing. The other thing I just wanted to kind of highlight, and that was in those discussions too, is that the power dynamic here is a big thing to keep in mind. These companies have, the top 7 companies are bigger than the GDP of any European country. So that's what you're up against here with your large hyperscaler companies. Their market caps are measured in 4, 5, 6, 7 trillion, projected 20 trillion by 2030. What can we do as, individuals, or let's think about it from kind of our own area? What does a small county in Texas have to do if somebody wants to buy up all their land and make their whole county a data center? What power do they have to say no when they need the money? There's an information difference between those selling it and those buying, and they're very persuasive, either directly and there's plenty of under the table, greasing of wheels too. So the biggest thing I see here is when you concentrate power in these hyperscalers, does any of the rest of this even matter? It's really hard to, I'm be a little dark here. It's really hard to imagine that they don't get their way, and right now with the government examples, it's a great one. It's like they've lobbied to have the federal government shut down state regulation of AI. Keep in mind, this is a Republican government that's shutting down state control. So that's ironic, right? So that's how persuasive they are. So that's why I'm a little bit, I'm gonna be a little bit pessimistic on this ethical gatekeepers. I feel like money tends to win out at the end, and we won't get a good reset until something really bad happens, unfortunately.
Well, that's just to round this point out really quickly. Sorry, Jeff, but Dustin, I think you hit it right on the head. Of Vanessa, you did too. Like literacy and power, and in the market, like we had a good example. We hoped back in the 2010s when Apple started to take phone security and cybersecurity really. They started to really value it, right? Not just for their consumers, but as a stance. They refused to give a backdoor encryption key to the FBI after the San Bernardino shooting in 2015, right? And that actually drove consumers to buy Apple over Android. And the reason I think it might be different now is, Apple has a product, right? Like a phone, right? Or a laptop. And it's really just two players in that space. There's, Mac and PC, there's iPhone and Android, right? There's like these two clear competitors. And they say, I'm going to make cybersecurity really important, and that's going to be a feature of our product. And now it's like of course, you have the top four, the big four in AI tools, but you have so many others that are propagating off of similar technologies, right? And it's harder when there's so many, right? You're starting to kind of play whack-a-mole in the market, and it's almost, you would think that because there's more player, there's less power, but it's not. There's so many of them, and they're all so aligned on making sure that this keeps moving forward. And so now you're not just fighting Apple and Android, you're fighting 50 producers of AI tools and products. And it's an uphill battle for sure.
Yeah, very good. Vanessa, you were alluding to kind of a question you wanted to answer about risk and wellness. Any other thoughts about that are deep and personal to us in higher education, discussing this with our students or our future workers, being aware of AI and the ethics of risk?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think information is power, right? And I think that where do we start? That's with students, right? And I mean, even K-12. I think there's still areas, particularly in K-12, where the stance is you don't use AI. You don't use it, right? That's not necessarily a good thing, because you're eventually going to make it somewhere where you're going to use AI. And so I think really what we need to work on is laying the groundwork for ethical AI usage starting in K-12, right? It is not the enemy. You're probably going to use it in the future, whether it be in high school or in college or at work. And so how do we lay the groundwork for informed users and ethical users? I think we need to start very early and ensure that we communicate that AI is not, it's not all bad, and we make of it what we want to, really. And so, I try to tell students, they always look at me like I'm crazy when I go, do you use AI? And they go, no. And I'm like, well, you should. And they go, what? It's the first time we hear this. And I tell them, ask it to quiz you. You want to practice for that exam, ask it to give you quiz questions, and then ask it to grade you. It's a very useful tool, but we need to lay that groundwork and saying it's not, we tend to see it just like, oh, it's bad. It's like for plagiarism. Students are only going to plagiarize, and they're only going to get those ideas and use them and, copy and paste them. We need to lay the groundwork to say, this is not actually, that's the worst use. An essay coming from AI, it's not a great essay. It tends to be very generic. It tends towards the center. It can't cite. It's not a great usage. You're probably not going to get a great grade. But instead, how about you use it for maybe some research? You can do research a lot faster, right? Using AI. You can test yourself. You can ask it for feedback. You can write a paper, not ask it to write a paper, but write a paper and say, hey, give me a grade. What do you think? And then work on your paper. I think but that's something that we need to work on from the time kids arrive at school. I think it needs to be, and we need a lot of education and a lot of literacy for teachers and professors as well in order to make that happen, right? So it's hard. I'm not saying it would be easy. We've been talking about this in cybersecurity forever as well, laying the groundwork. But I think that's the only way that we're able to combat some of the negatives, right, of AI.
Agreed. Good point. Dustin, you had said there was a kind of an answer you were holding on to until a little bit later, and I wondered if you remember what was on the tip of your tongue or whether you had gotten to it yet.
I almost forgot, but it just came to me. So back again. So I think we're talking about the risk associated with ambient documentation. I'm just gonna broaden this a little bit because ambient documentation is a very specific form that's going to be used in healthcare to help write notes. But a lot of the things are going to be relevant in other fields where you're at a business meeting and one of your colleagues has a Plod note pen in their pocket and it's listening to everything that you're saying in that supposedly private meeting to be used either for good, which is to remember what the meeting was about and to follow up, but could it be used on the back end to say, so-and-so said this during the meeting and that's incongruent with some whatever, and I think that in the law, there's plenty of things where these ambient listening devices could be used on either side of the table, so to speak. So I think that privacy, it's already been eroded. We are under no like delusions that our lives are private now with social media, cameras everywhere, and all that. But the difference now is it used to be really hard to sift through all of that data to get the information about the citizen, about the colleague, about the friend or whatever. There was just a lot of data to get that information that you want out of it. But with AI, it's really great at synthesizing large amounts of data and making correlates between seemingly disparate points of information. So if we have AI powered listening devices, like Apple's going to come out with a pin and you're going to wear it and it's going to say, I'm proudly Apple, but it's going to be watching and listening to everybody. Plod has one, your phone's doing it, the camera on the street corner does it, all of your cars will be doing it. What does that mean for privacy that we've already eroded? I mean, I think that the privacy becomes essentially zero. Your insurance company will know what time you leave in the morning. They will know how fast you drive, how many stops you make, how quickly you stopped your car, whether you used full self-driving or not, or whatever. It'll know, so they'll be able to make personalized risk stratification for you alone and taking it to shopping. They will know the exact price that you're willing to pay for something. In healthcare, I am really worried about triaging patients based on their lifestyle. Like who gets care is going to be, so each patient is going to represent a risk to that healthcare system. It's going to represent a risk to the insurance company, and they're going to be reduced to that number. And that number is going to decide whether you get care or you do not get care, or the amount of care that you get. So bringing it back to healthcare, I'm really worried about how privacy is going to interplay with our current healthcare system, and really make it difficult for those that need care to get that care.
And I'll add real quick.
Yes, please,
Dustin. When I teach privacy law, I teach two classes, and I talk about this in both classes, but I talk about it a lot in the comparative privacy law class, where I talk about the EU versus the US and our approaches. We've never recognized, a broad privacy guarantee in our Constitution, right? We have the Fourth Amendment, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures. And we developed, the reasonable expectations of privacy out of that case law and out of our Supreme Court's precedent. But we've never recognized, and in fact, recently, our Supreme Court has said you don't have necessarily an unlimited decisional privacy right. So the decisions you make about your own body or about your own lifestyle, the raising of your children, right? Who you love and who you marry, that kind of thing. But we also have said the informational privacy is very suspect under the Supreme Court's precedent right now. So all of this data that we are collecting through passive and active surveillance and the kind of like ambient AI that Dustin's talking about, we're not even sure that we actually have a constitutional protection against that, right? The court has been very unclear about whether or not you have a right to informational privacy. So one, like constitutionally, we're already a little bit behind. But two, there's a concept that I teach my students called the privacy paradox. And it's this idea that every single person on this call right now probably would say we value our privacy. And we say that. We say we're worried about the privacy risks. But then we actively do things that are against that interest and against that value. And the question is, are we doing it because we want to, right? Or are we doing it because we're not informed about the privacy risks? And that's a huge debate, between not just legal scholars, but anybody who writes in privacy. Is the idea of are people actively doing things against their privacy interests in a willing fashion or in a unwitting, right? And just didn't have the appropriate information to make those kinds of decisions. And I completely agree, Dustin, and it's something I've written about and others have written about, that decision and the outcomes of those decisions almost always have a disparate impact on those who are underrepresented in our communities, right? The lower socioeconomic status, racial and ethnic and religious minorities, those who are oppressed, tend to be the ones who are most affected, even in the healthcare system, by not understanding those risks and making those decisions that are against their privacy interests.
Real quick, as you're talking, I'm thinking about informed consent and how that needs to change in healthcare. But it's not just healthcare; it's informed consent with everything we do with data. And how can we make that informed consent accessible? Right now, it's hidden on purpose, though we just click the thing and move on. Is there a better way to do this so people know what their data is being used?
For anybody who's read, there's a scholar from George Washington University School of Law. His name is Daniel Soloff, and he argues we basically need to abandon consent, like informed consent, express consent, consent, passive consent. It's so murky legally at this point. And you're right. Like, how do you make informed consent? Is it a privacy policy? Nobody can read it. Nobody wants to read it, right? Nobody's going to read it. And even if you give, in the healthcare context, you sign your HIPAA acknowledgement that allows them to sell your data for marketing purposes and maybe share it with other healthcare providers and things. You have the notice of privacy practices, but that doesn't mean you understand them. And whose obligation is it? And Vanessa, I think you touched on this when you talk about literacy. Yes, literacy is important. Who is in charge of educating other than us, right? And we have students who are afforded the privilege to go to college or to go to law school or to go to med school, right? Go to grad school. And maybe it's easier for us to give them that literacy, but what about all the other people who aren't afforded that luxury and that privilege, right? Whose job is it to give them the information they need to validly consent down the road? And we have not come up with a great answer for that. And I don't really know if any other regime has either, but we certainly haven't.
Good point. Everyone, in the last 6 to so minutes, because it's been a great discussion so far, let me see if I can't get to some questions that are in the question and answer pod. Vanessa, this is kind of a curious one that you could talk to in no particular order for the few that have put in questions. And if you want to try to lodge one in, please do. At least we'll have the record of what was on your mind, attendees. So in regards to the K-12 point you made about starting off with exposure to AI in early years of early childhood education, we as adults, I think the question reads, paraphrasing, but we have the discernment. We have a little bit more maybe cognitive knowledge about what AI does and what an individual does when they're using AI. And so what do the teachers and parents and adults during those early years kind of need to also know so that could be um, the best exposure in K-12? So any other thoughts about that K-12 experience?
Yes, I think I don't think necessarily that we need to be telling children, go do your homework with AI. That's not, I think there's a time and a place for everything. However, I do think we need to start laying the groundwork of informing what AI is, how it works. Because I think right now what AI seems like is just this awesome thing that is, like Terminator. And, it's very, I don't know, I guess fantasized for certain ages at a certain point, right? And I think we need to make it more real and more informed. This is what AI is, and this is how it works. We have all this information, and I know it's not always public information, but a lot of the information, right? You see what's on the internet? Well, it goes out to the internet and takes stuff out from there and then summarizes stuff for you. Just understanding where it's coming from, right? Because and understanding that if we already teach children not everything that's out there is real, well, guess what? AI is getting a lot of stuff that's out there, hence it's not perfect. So I think laying that groundwork is very important. And at some point, yes, introducing ethical AI use. But again, I think there's a time and a place for everything. So I wouldn't say at all ages everything is acceptable. Absolutely not.
Either way, I definitely hear you saying, and all we can imagine, if where there might be exposure, there's probably a wonderful educational opportunity in those moments. So it's not a simple answer. It certainly wouldn't be a simple task, but it could be an educational one that we probably are all responsible for. So Mason, this might have been one for you. So I'm paraphrasing. Are you aware of any of the kind of interaction chatbots and pods that have come into the legal discussion where the privacy settings, maybe on any particular product, do really keep or have been acknowledged that they really do keep your work private? Or is that, how to say it? We're not guessing that it's failing there, but are you aware of any cases to where what was said was private as a setting didn't stay private?
Yeah, for sure. So one, on a related note, well, actually, I'll talk specifically about the privacy settings first, because I think it was asking, if you go into a particular tool and you say, don't use my data for training, does that actually do anything? And it's like, not really, because at the end of the day, the platform is going to decide what kinds of data apply to the setting that you have chosen. So if you said, don't use my personal data for training, and that's something you agreed to in the terms of use, and maybe you actually went and configured your own settings, right? That doesn't mean it just shuts off the data flow, right? That it sends data to work for training, to practice and develop future use cases, right? So I guess it kind of works and kind of doesn't, because at the end of the day, it's the one making the decision, not you, on whether or not this particular data that you entered is the kind that can't be used for training and can. So I'm very skeptical. In a related note, a lot of people don't realize, I think, just how far down the contracting chain you are and how far down the terms of use you are when you're using a particular tool, right? So if you're using a sandboxed instance of a tool, and sorry, I'm trying not to be like super technical here, and I definitely don't want to be technical because I'm surrounded by two technical people on this panel. I've always been told if you're in a room full of if you're in a room full of tech people, talk about the law. If you're in a room full of lawyers, talk about the tech, and then you always seem smarter. So I'm going to talk about the law for a second. And the way terms of use and terms of condition are flowed down from the original platform to this new instance. And then there's this company, this third party that's going to create an individualized chatbot for you, right? Well, you only see the terms of use and the terms and conditions that you signed with the platform that you are using right now, or the instance of the platform that you're using right now. But that company or that platform is bound by terms and conditions that you were not a party to. And so it will abide by that version of the terms of use and terms and conditions. So even though you think, me and this particular tool right now have agreed that these are the rules, there's an entirely different set of rules 2, 3, 4 levels above you. So that makes, adjusting privacy settings and adjusting your expectations, I think, really difficult because you don't have any insight into that.
Wonderful. Folks, we're at our time, so if anyone does need to leave, please, we understand. But I'm going to go one quick round to all three of our panelists as we conclude our last few minutes, and ask them kind of a speed 15-second, maybe it's a 1 hour, 1 second answer, and it is starting real quickly. Dustin, real quickly, what are some positive thoughts about AI from a positive perspective? What are you seeing that is a good out there?
Well, in my field, being able to, if done correctly, the AI can make you more efficient with the things that are not patient facing, which can give you more one-on-one time with your patient, more attention to your patients so that you can react to their individual needs, try to fulfill their rehab healthcare goals, and not be worried about the paperwork and those kind of things. So from that perspective, that's a positive. I don't want to come for this whole thing to come off very negative, and I think it's very easy too. I think there is a future that if we did this correctly and we're able to retool society and keep AI in an ethically bound kind of way, our future could be one of more productivity that allows us to have a 3-day workday, 3-day work week, more time with our loved ones, with things that make us fulfilled. And that's where I hope we get to. I'm most worried about the period of transition, and I hope we don't totally run it off the rails in that transition period. So,
gotcha. Thank you for that one, Vanessa. What are some positive thoughts to leave us on?
And definitely productivity. Doing things like removing bias from a communication. You can test that yourself. You can write an email and go to AI and say, hey, is this going to be offensive in some way? Am I biased in some way? Am I, could you soften up? I actually soften my communications with AI because I tend to be overly direct. And so I will, say, can you please soften this? So I don't sound as direct as I tend to sound.
I've never heard that about you.
I think, it can be a personal assistant, a private tutor. I think there's so many good uses to AI. I'm a fan. I'm not saying it's without risk, right? Obviously.
Right.
But I think productivity and just being able to think of programming. I mean, I remember sitting down and looking at my program that is going in a loop and I can't figure out why. And now I can just put it on AI and say, why am I not seeing? Why isn't this running? And, figure it out like that. So I think all of those are huge benefits.
Yeah, productivity and hopes. Okay, Mason, how about last hopes and thoughts for you? That positive.
I about a month ago, I went and spoke at St. Mary's Hall, the prep school here in San Antonio. They do an issues day, and their issues day this year was on AI. And what I left feeling so optimistic about, and something that I still every day wake up being optimistic about, is I think this generation, maybe generation and a half below me, I guess, Gen Zers and later, I think they've watched millennials and those a little older than them get destroyed by social media. Like, I think they have watched their relationships, their civics, their engagement, their wellness, to Vanessa's point. I think they've watched it be destroyed by social media, and I think they are ready to act. At least, at least a good portion of them. I think they've watched that. They've taken those lessons from social media. They're now applying it to the harms of AI, right? And we're already seeing, a court in Los Angeles and a court in New Mexico are finding new creative ways to hold social media platforms accountable for intentionally designing addictive products that are going to harm children. I think with that framework and with that precedent and this attitude from the younger generation that we're not going to let this happen to us, right? That makes me optimistic, and that maybe they will be the gatekeepers that, help us use this ethically and responsibly.
Fantastic. First of all, thank you to everyone. Thank you for the attendees. Thank you, Dustin. Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you, Mason. Your professors in the absolute right place. Thank you for being at each of your institutions. Attendees, we have amazing educators doing amazing higher education academy work, and it is a pleasure to bring them together. Hope we continue to. We'll see you at the next event, which is on the 23rd here in April, as we kind of round out this spring and hope to do it more. I remind you, I've got a Post-it note that says we'll be sending out a survey to give us some more thoughts on what you thought, as well as what you want next. And again, my biggest advice is attend all of these. Share your own thoughts down the hallway and at home, and again, take a break from it for sure. But you're attendees of the conversation, and it is just great to get charged up, to think of things from a left, or, well, let's not say it that way, think of things from a positive and concerned way, and know that we still have a part to play and we still have a future to make. Thank you for all of our guest panelists, and thank you. Hope you have a wonderful Friday. Enjoy your time. Bye, all.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you all. Yeah.
Thank
Have
you.
a great weekend.
Yeah.
Thank
Have
you.
a great weekend.